All right, let's finish this up. So we are on, or I am on page 405. They talk about a custom constraint. You should all be able to get what that is. Sometimes, for example, a part number has to start with a letter, followed by 3 numbers, followed by 2 letters, followed by 3 more numbers, or something like that. All right, that'd be a custom constraint. It has to match a pattern that isn't a common type of pattern. So in other words, if there are constraints that you have that are different than most constraints, all right, you can create your own pattern. That's what the author is saying here. But the whole idea, and the takeaway from here should be that what you want to do, a couple things. First of all, as I mentioned before, the more things you're putting in here, the more secure you're making your application. All right. One thing that I have been chastised for, and so have the people in St. Louis, is that we don't do enough here in talking about security. All right. Now I was reading an article this morning. I didn't finish it, but it was something I got online, and they're saying that I had never thought of this before. Okay, but you remember when we in the AWD1111 class that when you did a URL, how it replaced your current URL unless you put in target equal underscore blank. Remember that? Okay. Now they're saying that's one of the newest security problems, because people can get in and when you've got the target equal underscore blank, instead of that they can make other things come up, or they're able to add things to your page. So that's one of the newest security holes. It's the old joke that as you build a better mousetrap, the mice keep getting smarter. All right, it's the same kind of thing with, again, even people who go in and do stuff they're not supposed to do. It's less than 10% of them usually who are really trying to cause harm. A lot of people just want to see what they can do. But there are people there that, you know it, you've heard about it, you've read about it, steal identity, steal this, steal that, do things they're not supposed to do. All right. So the chapter ends with, starting on page 407, and the last 7 or 8 pages here, the author says, all of the examples discussed so far are what are known as conventional or convention-based routing. All right? And it says that starting with MVC5, which is what we're working in, there's also support for something known as attribute routing. It says there the routes are defined by C# attributes that get applied. The author says right in this thing right here, this little thing on the rest of page 407, he says, I don't like this. Because again, it doesn't do that, it hurts that separation of concerns. But he also is good enough to say 2 things. First of all, just because I don't like it doesn't mean that it's bad. He said, I just think there's better ways of doing it. Second, everything that's been described so far in convention type routing will work with attribute routing. So you can mix and match, is what the author says here on the rest of page 407. Now, if you want to use this, for lack of better words, you've got to turn it on. So at the beginning of your register routes method, you've got to add that line that is shown there on near the top of page 408. Routes.mapMVC attribute routes. Okay, you have to add that. So it says calling this method causes the routing system to inspect the controller classes in the application. So it's now looking for these attributes that, again, you can pass in through the controller. Look on the screen, please. See this? That's what they're talking about. All right? So rather than you setting up things in your route config, now you're setting up things in your controller. We have done this. This is basically the equivalent of data annotations. All right, but it's data annotations. I don't know if you call them security data annotations or exactly what you'd call them. Okay. The author shows that and then mentions this is the basic use of the route attribute, which is used to define a static route for an action method, and they show how it can be used. All right. But again, the idea is You don't want people to be able to do things on a site that they shouldn't do. There will always be people who will try to do things on a site that they shouldn't do. But what you want to do is to minimize the amount of damage they can possibly do. All right? So, creating routes with segment variables. This is page 410. And as the author mentions here, the attribute routing feature supports all of the same features as convention-based routing, but they're done with attributes. So again, you look in here, you'll notice you're putting a lot of the same type of stuff. It's not exactly the same. It's syntactically different. It's in a different part of the program. It's in the controller as opposed to in the route config file. But they are C# attributes nevertheless. All right. 411, applying route constraints. And as the author says here, routes defined using attributes can be constrained, just like what we looked at earlier. So notice, before we just said route. Now it's got to be route set up like this, very similar to what you saw before. All right. Not only that, as mentioned previously, you can combine the two. So you can combine convention-based routing with attribute-based routing, which means you're going to make some changes in your route config file, and you're going to make some changes in your controllers. And the author says, just be very leery when you're doing this. All right, it's very easy to go in, when you're doing mixing and matching, to end up with 404 errors. Right? And then finally, the last thing that's in here on the bottom of 413, and it goes on to 414, is the author talks about route prefixes. And he says there you can use the route prefix attribute to define a common prefix applied to all routes defined within a controller. All right? It says it's useful when you have multiple action methods that should be targeted. All right? That's pretty much it. Now, rather than making you go back and do what I did, which was basically try to go back and run these things, all right, I just think that's not only would probably bore you, but I don't know what you'd get out of it. So what I'm thinking is this. What I'd like you to do for this chapter is I'd like you to read this article. This was sent to you today. All right, it's called Routing Basics in ASP.NET MVC. And based on that, just write up a one-page paper summarizing that particular article. I don't want you to sit there and say, and like you grab that part, and you just throw it in there, and then you grab some stuff from over here, and you throw that. No, do it in your own words. Imagine that somebody asked you, you're out for a job interview. Chris is out for a job interview as an ASP.NET programmer. You said, no, I'm not. Yeah, but we're going to pretend you are. All right? And they say, Chris, tell me how routing works in ASP.NET MVC. That's how you'd answer the question, using your own words. Does that make sense? You should have time to read this right now and at least get a good start on it. You've got an hour and 25 minutes. You might finish it today. Tomorrow, I'm going to go over, I didn't realize it would take this short a time, but as my brain sometimes, believe it or not, multi-processes, I was just thinking, no, I'm not going to keep going over these, because if I keep putting them in there, it was boring as hell this morning. I'm not lying to you. You put that in there, you put in another one, basically you'd be running the same tests, so it would look the same almost every time. All right, and I thought doing that 20 or 30 times, I didn't know what you were going to get out of that. All right, and if you do get ahead, then tomorrow I'm going to ask that you do a similar thing, but grab the article that's on areas. Read that, and again, give me about a one page. All right, now what may help you, this is the other one that I sent you. You don't have to do this one. This was a little more complex of an article, but it's called Attribute Routing versus Convention Routing, ASP.NET MVC Demystified. So you've got 3 articles. You're going to write me one-page summaries on 2 of them. And the third one, they help you answer the first one. Hopefully that makes some sense. All right. That's it.